What I saw on the other side wasn't a bright hallway or the entrance to a beautiful apartment. It was a dark, deteriorated corridor that looked abandoned, and at the far end, there was a woman standing there. And she was smiling at me from ear to ear. What if you stepped into an elevator, and it took you somewhere the building wasn't supposed to have? Some deliveries are simple. You drop off the food, collect the tip, and move on with your night. But sometimes, the building opens a door that shouldn't exist. Good evening, Glenn. I'm writing to you because, honestly, this was the strangest experience I had during the years I spent delivering food in Guadalajara. And no, it's not one of those horror stories where someone says they saw a shadow or heard something strange. This was something else. It happened on a slow Thursday night in February. I remember it clearly because it was seriously cold, and I felt like I was wasting my time. The phone at the restaurant was ringing only once in a while, and even though I had worked all day without much rest, I had barely earned enough for a pack of tortillas and the gas I had spent. Then suddenly, the grill and roasted chicken restaurant where I worked received a large order. A really large one, actually. Almost enough food for a banquet. I took the order, and considering the amount of food, I was hoping the tip would be just as generous. The address was strange. I didn't recognize it, even though I had lived in Guadalajara for about 3 years. The place was an old building, but a very nice one. Now I should mention something important. The restaurant where I worked had a policy that the food had to be delivered to the customer's door, not to the entrance of the building, to the door of their house, their apartment, wherever they lived. Many customers who lived in apartment buildings understood that this wasn't always possible, and would come downstairs to pick up their food. But there were others who were stubborn, and didn't understand that I didn't have keys to their buildings and couldn't just walk in. At first, everything seemed normal. I got off my motorcycle and walked up the stairs to the building entrance, already annoyed when I saw that the customer wasn't waiting for me behind the gate. But right away I noticed the gate was slightly open, and the glass door leading into the lobby was open too. I looked around and there was no one in the lobby. There was a small security desk, but it was empty. The building felt strange. I could really feel the silence in the place, and there was no activity from the floors above. I had to make the delivery on the 12th floor. Unfortunately, many buildings had locked access doors, and the elevators also required key cards, which meant that sometimes I had to climb the stairs. I figured that might be the case here too, but I decided to try the elevator anyway. Even though it had an electronic key reader, I thought it was worth trying. I stepped inside and to my surprise, the elevator only had buttons up to the 9th floor. My mind started looking for explanations. I figured maybe the elevator didn't go to the 12th floor because that level was the penthouse of the building. In the end, I decided I'd at least try to go to the 9th floor, and from there I'd only have to climb a few more flights of stairs. I pressed the button, but the elevator didn't move. The doors closed, but the elevator stayed in place. I pressed the button to open the doors, but it didn't respond either. That's when I started getting nervous, thinking I had gotten stuck. Then suddenly the numbers on the panel began to flicker. The feeling was strange. The elevator shook slightly, like it was hesitating about whether to move or not. Then I felt a push downward while the metal box began moving upward. I tried to calm myself down, although honestly it felt like I was going up much faster than I should have in a building that supposedly only had 12 floors. I looked again, and the destination number said 12, even though the buttons only went up to 9. As the elevator kept rising, my heart was pounding. My back hunched forward without me realizing it, and it was getting harder to breathe. Meanwhile, the panel kept flickering, showing the number 12 as the destination. Then suddenly the elevator stopped, and the door stayed shut for a moment. I could swear the elevator had gone much higher than 12 floors based on the speed. But that was far from the strangest thing that was about to happen. After a few seconds of trembling in place, the elevator doors began to open with a horrible creaking sound. like they hadn't been opened on that floor in years. What I saw on the other side wasn't a bright hallway or the entrance to a beautiful apartment. It was a dark, deteriorated corridor that looked abandoned, and at the far end, illuminated only by the light coming from the elevator, there was a woman standing there. She was dressed in red, and she was smiling at me from ear to ear. My body reacted instantly. I didn't even have time to think because fear hit me all at once. As soon as that woman began walking toward me with slow steps, I started pressing the button to close the doors. I was terrified and wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. The elevator rattling around me only made me more nervous, and the flickering numbers made me think it might close any second. But nothing happened. I couldn't take my eyes off her, and I felt a cold sensation running down my back because I had the overwhelming feeling that if that woman reached me, something terrible would happen. I kept pressing the button over and over while she slowly walked closer. Finally, the elevator reacted and the door slammed shut. 1 second later, I felt myself briefly lifted as the elevator dropped downward at full speed. It descended so fast to the lobby that I thought I was going to throw up. When the doors opened, I stumbled out and almost fell. But a security guard and a woman caught me and asked how I had gotten inside. Thank God I was still holding the delivery bags in my hands, because otherwise they probably would have called the police. I was speechless for a moment, but luckily they calmed down when they realized I was just a delivery driver. A few minutes later, a resident came down the stairs with a couple of friends to pick up the order. Obviously, I didn't want to explain what had happened in the elevator, so I just said I had gotten stuck. That's when they told me the elevator had been broken for several days. I didn't understand anything. I couldn't understand how I had gone up, or why the elevator had worked like that. Security in that building was strict. They had card readers everywhere. I didn't have a card, and when I told them the doors had been open when I arrived, they had a hard time believing me. The guard looked skeptical. He insisted he hadn't been careless at any moment, that he had only stepped away to the bathroom for a minute and had made sure the gate and door were closed. He asked me again how I had gotten inside. In the end, I didn't know what to say. Luckily, the customer stepped in to help me. She said she had ordered food delivery and that they were bothering both her and her driver. In other words, me. I handed over the food, she paid, and yes, they gave me an excellent tip. She even apologized for how strict the building security was. I was so nervous I don't even remember what I said back. I just left. Throughout the rest of the night, I kept replaying everything in my head. The truth is, I couldn't get the image of that woman in red walking toward me out of my mind. The fear was still stuck in my chest, even though logic told me it must have been some kind of hallucination. And honestly, I don't rule that out. I can't even rule out the possibility that I had some kind of psychotic episode, and imagined everything while I was trapped in that elevator. I've never had any psychiatric history, but during those days I had been watching a lot of horror movies and videos. Maybe it was just a mix of exhaustion and suggestion. But no matter the explanation, what I experienced that night was the most terrifying moment of my life. And believe me, ever since then, every time I have to enter a building with an elevator, I get a small panic attack. I don't know if I'll ever find out what really happened, but that experience stayed with me like a nightmare that refuses to fade. What if the person waiting for your delivery wasn't casting a shadow at all? Some encounters are strange, but when something standing in front of you breaks the simplest rule of light and shadow, your instincts start screaming that something is very wrong. When I turned 18, I didn't manage to get into college, at least not into the program I wanted. So to help financially at home and not be a burden to my dad, I decided to work as a delivery driver for a food app. My brother lent me his motorcycle, and I made deliveries all around Caracas. This happened at the end of 2021. One night I went to pick up a large food order, and I mean really large. I'm not even sure how I managed to fit everything inside the delivery box. Once I had it all packed, I headed straight to the address, which was about 20 minutes away, in an area known as Colinas de Belo Monte. It was Friday night, and there was still a lot of activity in the streets, even though it was already around 11. But as I moved away from the more commercial area and continued toward the address they had given me, things grew quieter. The streets became calmer with a noticeable sense of silence. When I arrived at the delivery location, a tall apartment building, a girl called me and said her friend was already coming down to pick up the order. She asked me to please be patient because the elevator was broken. That detail is important. She said her friend. So I stayed parked in front of the building, waiting for the gate to open and for a girl to come out with the payment. I could hear that there was a party happening somewhere on one of the upper floors, because I could hear laughter and music drifting down. Meanwhile, I sat there on the motorcycle. It was cold since it was November, and that section of the street was lit only by a single white street lamp that stood a little farther up the road to the right. That detail is important too. After waiting a few seconds, I don't think even a full minute had passed, the gate opened. But instead of a girl, a very tall man with a clean-shaven face and large eyes greeted me and asked if I was the delivery driver. The question struck me as strange. Couldn't he see the huge delivery bag full of food strapped to the back of my motorcycle? Still, I acted polite and told him yes. He said he was a friend of Natalie, the girl who had placed the order. Before I started taking the food packages out of the bag, I asked him to make the payment first. He pulled out a debit card from his pocket. The card looked very worn. So worn that the bank's name was barely readable anymore. All that remained visible was a faded blue color. I took the card and pulled out my payment terminal. The moment I inserted the card into the slot, the machine gave an error. The strange man asked me to try again. While I did, a rancid smell began reaching my nose. At first I assumed he just had poor hygiene, although he actually looked quite neat. I inserted the card again. Another error. While I stared down at the machine, trying to get it to work, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The street lamp a few meters up the road was shining toward us from the right side. My own shadow stretched long across the sidewalk, running down the pavement. But the man standing in front of me had no shadow. My immediate reaction wasn't fear. It was complete confusion. I think I froze there for a few seconds, trying to come up with explanations for why he wasn't casting a shadow. I couldn't find any. Then the man repeated in a hoarse voice that I should try the card again. By that point, I was starting to feel very uncomfortable. I inserted the card one last time, and when the machine produced another error, I took the opportunity to glance discreetly to the left, and then toward his feet. That man wasn't casting any kind of shadow at all, and I'm certain he knew that I had noticed, because when I looked up again, trembling, he was smiling at me with a malicious expression. The rancid smell had grown stronger, and there was something sinister about the aura coming from him. Stuttering, I asked if he had another way to pay. He simply said he'd be right back. Then he opened the gate again, without using a key or anything, and walked back inside the building. It's hard to explain the sense of dread that man gave me. I started seriously considering canceling the order, or calling Natalie so she could send a bank transfer instead, and I could just leave the food on the sidewalk. But right when I was about to drop the food at the entrance and leave, the sound of several lively voices stopped me. The building gate opened again. 2 young women and a guy stepped outside and asked for my name. I confirmed it and they thanked me before offering a card to pay. One of the guys immediately complained about the rancid smell. And since the 3 of them were standing exactly where that man had been standing before, I noticed something very clearly. They all had shadows, which meant I hadn't imagined anything. I gathered the courage to ask if the man who had just gone inside was a friend of theirs. since he had said he would pay and take the order. They didn't just say they didn't know him. They said they hadn't crossed paths with any man at all. Only a few seconds had passed between the moment that man walked inside and the moment they came out through the gate. And if what Natalie had said was true and the elevators were broken, I don't see how that man could have avoided them. One of the girls noticed the fear in my face after we finished the payment and asked if something had happened. The truth is, I was too nervous to ride my motorcycle right away, so I told them exactly what I had seen. The three of them seemed more excited than frightened, almost like I had given them a new topic of conversation for the rest of the night. But at least they were kind enough to offer me a soda and stay with me for a few minutes, until my hand stopped shaking. I don't know if they believed me or not, but at least they didn't leave me alone. Because I'm almost certain that the moment they had gone back inside, that man would have returned. What if you heard children laughing inside an apartment, where the tenant swears she lives alone? Sometimes a delivery is just a delivery, but sometimes a simple call through an intercom lets you hear something that shouldn't be there at all. This happened to me in Valencia, Spain many years ago. In 2004 to be exact. I had just turned 19 and was working as a food delivery driver. It was Saturday night, and the shift at the restaurant was pretty busy. As soon as I returned from one delivery, they would send me right back out with another order. At one point, I got a delivery in the city center. The first strange thing I noticed was the street. Even though it was Saturday night in downtown Valencia, the place was empty. Completely silent. I don't mean quiet with just a few people around. I mean there wasn't a single person on that street. I can assure you that was unusual, because at 11 at night there were usually still bars open, people heading out for dinner, things like that. But on that street it was as if everyone had hidden at the same time. I noticed it, but I eventually brushed it off and stopped in front of the entrance of the small building where I had to make the delivery. I checked the apartment number I'd been given and pressed it on the intercom. A woman answered on the other side. I told her I was the delivery driver with an order for Anna. She confirmed it was her and said she was coming down and to give her a second. I looked up. The building wasn't very tall, only 5 floors, so I figured I wouldn't have to wait long. However, just as I thought she had hung up, something happened. I don't know if I'd call it strange at that moment, but it turned out to be important. The call stayed open. I heard the woman's footsteps walking away and the sound of a door closing, so I assumed she had accidentally forgotten to hang up the intercom. I stood there holding the food bag, listening to the faint background noise coming through the speaker. It felt almost like I was inside her living room. At first there was silence. Then a moment later the laughter started. It was the laughter of small children, very clear. I could hear their footsteps running around the room and the sound of a ball bouncing. It sounded like they were playing a game. From the different voices, I counted maybe 2 or 3 kids jumping around and talking to each other. Nothing unusual. One voice shouted to pass the ball. Another told them to be careful so they wouldn't break something. It was all laughter. I even smiled because it reminded me of my younger cousins. And then Anna came down. I don't think it took her more than 2 minutes. She stepped out the building door and she was fairly young, maybe in her 20s, with her hair tied back. You could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but honestly she looked far too young to have 3 kids. And the food order was way too small for 4 people. She handed me the money. I gave her the bag. And jokingly, I told her it sounded like her kids had a lot of energy. At first, she hadn't paid attention to the background noise. But when she looked at the intercom and then back at me, she asked what I was talking about. I repeated that her kids were pretty lively and that I could hear them through the intercom. The friendly smile on Anna's face disappeared instantly. Her expression turned serious, and her face went pale as if all the blood had drained from her body. It was incredible. I thought she might faint right there. Her mouth hung slightly open as she leaned closer to the intercom, like she had just heard a voice she didn't want to hear. I assumed she hadn't understood me, so I repeated myself, even chuckling a little, saying she must have hung up the intercom incorrectly. Anna didn't laugh. I don't think she even blinked. She just stood there listening. And yes, the intercom was still open. You could still hear the children playing on the other side of the line. The laughter continued, unaware that someone outside was listening. Or at least that's what I thought. Every now and then, a little voice would say something I couldn't quite make out, and another voice would respond with that high-pitched laughter. The woman tightened her grip on the food bag and whispered to me with a trembling voice that she lived alone. A strange chill ran through me, but I was still in logical explanation mode. I told her it might be interference from another apartment in the building. But then the sounds inside the apartment changed. Instead of laughter, we began to hear crying. The children sounded panicked. I started getting anxious while Anna shook her head, telling me there were no children in that building. And on the intercom screen, the number of her apartment was blinking. It wasn't an error. It was her apartment number, and the call was still open. Anna saw it too. I watched her swallow a sob before she began to cry. Not the kind of quiet crying someone does politely. This was the kind that comes from pure anguish and fear. I stood there frozen because I had no idea what was happening to her. And the children were still crying on the other side of the intercom. I tried to calm her down and suggested we go upstairs together. I told her it was probably just some misunderstanding. And right then the call suddenly disconnected. It was as if someone on the other side had heard us talking and decided to cut the connection. The moment it ended, the silence in the building entrance became incredibly heavy. She had just told me she lived alone. The street had already been quiet, but in that moment it felt like we had both been locked inside a place where absolutely nothing could be heard. My nerves hit me all at once. I could even feel my ears pounding. I didn't know what to say or what to do until I felt Anna grab my arm, trembling, as if begging me not to leave. I looked around the lobby as if I might see someone standing on the staircase. But we were alone. No one came out of the building. No one made a single sound while she continued crying. I still had to get back to work. But that night, something inside me told me to stay with her. I felt bad leaving her there alone. And if I'm honest, I was also a little afraid of riding off on my motorcycle after hearing something that strange. I had a very bad feeling. I told her I could stay for a moment if she wanted. She nodded softly, and we sat down on a small wooden bench in the building lobby. Anna held the food bag in her arms. I sat there with my helmet in my hands. We were two strangers caught in a very strange situation, not understanding what had just happened. After a while, when she calmed down enough to talk, she told me what she believed had happened. Before she rented that apartment, the landlord had been honest with her. He had told her that a family used to live there. They were the previous owners. They had 3 children and their lives were going well. Until one night they were involved in a traffic accident. The father and the children died. When she told me that, I felt a sharp knot in my stomach. I wanted to say something comforting, something logical. But honestly, I didn't believe it myself, so I stayed quiet. She continued explaining that since she had moved in 3 months earlier, she had occasionally heard strange things in the apartment. But never anything like that. And never through the intercom. I didn't know how to help her. I didn't know whether to hug her or suggest she call someone. At one point, I even thought about telling her she should move out. In the end, I did the only thing I could. I offered to walk her up to her apartment door. Anna accepted, and we climbed the stairs together to the top floor. I left her at the entrance of her apartment. I carefully glanced inside, and sure enough, it looked exactly like the home of someone living alone. The place was mostly empty. No children anywhere. I told her to take care and wished her a good night. She thanked me, and as soon as the door closed, I ran down those stairs as if a monster were chasing me. I didn't stop running until I reached the street and got on my motorcycle. Everything was empty. Saturday night in downtown Valencia, and it looked like a Tuesday at 3 in the morning. I started the bike and left. And I swear that night, every time the restaurant phone rang with a new order, I jumped. I stayed like that for weeks. Little by little, I eventually got over the experience, but I never heard anything about Anna again.